More claims of victory and vote rigging as the count in Afghanistan's elections continues. Just how fair was the vote? What will the outcome mean for the country, and how serious has the Taliban threat really been? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the programme. I'm Sahil Rahman. Corruption, violence and a low voter turnout. The results of Afghanistan's presidential elections are expected on Tuesday, and the elections are being criticised. Over 100 complaints have been filed with the Afghan Election Complaints Committee, and while the country's election commission tried to include women, they failed to recruit enough female staff to cover the women-only polling stations, leaving 650 closed. As James Bays reports, Afghanistan's second democratic elections may not have been free or fair.
The European Union had the largest number of international observers for this election, although they admit that poor security meant they were only able to visit 6 voting centres in the south of the country, where they believe voter turnout was particularly low. This, their initial verdict on the polls.
It is a question of legitimacy, but it will for the Afghan people themselves to decide. Unfortunately, in some part of the country, some inhabitants have been put in an obligation not to turn out.
The EU joined the White House and NATO commanders, declaring the elections a victory for the Afghan people. But one election observer, a former State Department official, says such judgments are premature.
I think there may have been 2 elections. There's that one election here in Kabul, and the other election is the election that occurred throughout the rest of the country, and particularly in the south. And I think our response at this point is we ought to wait and see. There should be no judgment based on that.
The counting is complete, but the Election Commission says the very first results won't be released until August the 25th.
It's better that our observer, our politician, our journalists, all of Afghanistan, Afghan people should be patient and wait. Soon it will be finished.
Complaints about irregularities continue to be lodged. Candidate Mirwais Yassini says 700 people voted for him in the southern city of Spinboldak. He claims these are the ballot papers found discarded by the side of the road. Theories and rumours continue to swirl around this city. Claims of fraud continue to mount. And yet it looks like it's still going to be days before we get the first indications of the outcome of this election. James Bays, Al Jazeera, Kabul.
Well, joining me now from Kabul are our guests. Firstly, Hekmat Karzai. He's director of the Centre for Conflict and Peace Studies. Also joining us is Glenn Cowan. He's co-founder of Democracy International. That's one of the groups monitoring the election. And finally, Fatana Isha Gilani. She's chairwoman of the Afghan Women Council. Thank you very much for joining us from Afghanistan. Mr. Cowan, can I begin with you? I mean, no clear winner, accusations of vote rigging, Taliban attacks across the country in the lead-up and during the election. I mean, how do we actually assess this second presidential election? Was it a total success or was it a failure?
In the period leading up to the elections, there were great concerns that the security situation could actually cause the elections to have to be postponed. So I think on Election Day, on Thursday, the 20th of August, there was a great deal of relief around the country that the Independent Election Commission was able to conduct an election at all. Now, that being said, there have been a series of problems with the way in which those elections have been conducted, and until we're able to see the vote count and to know how the Independent Complaint Commission handles the complaints that they receive, it's really impossible at this time to tell whether or not these elections were credible.
Okay, that's fine. Mr. Hekmat Karzai, just briefly your overall impression of what you think or how you think these elections have been conducted.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I think the elections were a success for the Afghan people, for the international community. In your report, it was mentioned that President Obama and these various other individuals have said that the elections were a success. But clearly, like all elections, there were some challenges, and these challenges clearly will be addressed by the Election Commission and the Complaint Commission, which is working to deal with this issue. But I think overall, the election was a success for the Afghan people.
Ms. Gilani in Kabul also, would you agree with that sentiment from Mr. Karzai? The elections were a success?
By the name of Allah, I'm not so much satisfied with this election because the commission of the election is not working very well, especially for the women in Afghanistan. And majority Afghan women, they are not coming for the votes. But we have so many problems. One problem is the security problems. Nobody is working for the security for many years. Now it's 5 years gone from the first election. We needed to go on the way of the peace and the security. But for the lack of security, the women not go to the station to give our vote, one. And the second is there is a lot of people has candidate for the presidency, and we have 41 or 43 people they want to come on the president. Most the women in Afghanistan, they are not understand who is this man or who is this gentleman who's coming on the election. And the second has a lot of picture on the paper for the election. The picture on the wall in the street on the Kabul bazaars or another part of Afghanistan is a very big and very nice picture. But the papers for the election, the picture is very weak. The most the people is not understand, especially for that woman, stay away from Kabul.
Those are smaller details perhaps that we will get into later in this program. But overall, you're not really that impressed with what's happened with the election from what I can gather. Mr. Cowan, let me bring you in back here. I mean, how serious should we take these accusations of fraud and vote rigging? We know the results are not in yet. We know that the Election Complaints Commission has not given their verdict. But with these accusations running, it must concern surely those watching and viewing this election.
We, Democracy International, had long-term observers in many areas in the south, east, and west of the country. And our long-term observers continue to send reports to us. We've had reports recently from the south that suggest that there have been some serious problems there. The exact extent and scope of them we do not yet know. It does appear, however, that the Elections Commission is having a somewhat more difficult time entering the data that they're receiving from the field than they might have thought. They put off announcing any returns until the 25th of August. I personally think that was a mistake. I think they should have begun to release returns as soon as they were available to them in order to lend more transparency to the system. If the count is slowed down, as it appears to be, and on the 25th, this Tuesday, they still aren't able to announce anything very definitive, I think this would be an unfortunate occurrence. And unless they're able to speed up their data entry of the count, I'm concerned that we may be heading towards still not very much information on the 25th.
With certain results coming out on the 25th, possibly final results in September and even a runoff in October, how destabilising can this be for Afghanistan if results are not given in very quickly or announced very quickly?
The problem with no data is that it leads to a lot of conjecture and rumors and unfounded concerns about a process. It would, I think, have been better if the Election Commission had released that information. I'm hoping that when they do release their first results on the 25th, that they will continue at that point to provide continuous returns as they receive them. The information from the polling stations is going through a series of data checks at the Elections Commission, and they have algorithms that look at the information and try to make decisions about whether or not what they're seeing is logical and whether or not there are pieces of information that they ought to question. I also think that that information should be made public as well so that there's greater transparency brought to this system. We don't have enough information right now to reach a conclusion about the credibility of this election. It's a very good thing that this election was held. Millions of Afghans went to the polls, but other millions were precluded from going to the polls by security threats and other issues. And I think there has to be a balance between accounting for how many people were able to vote as against those who were not able to.
Mr. Karzai, can I bring you in here? You know, whether these polls are disputed or not is something that will happen or will not happen in the coming days and weeks, but turnout certainly has been an issue. Turnout seems to have been low. Observers on the ground certainly saying that. I mean, if it is so low, are you concerned that there will come a time where people may say this election is null and void, it's not legitimate, we have to rerun the whole thing again?
No, it's unfortunate that many people think that these elections are either allegedly or in some shape or form not legitimate. We have to understand the Afghan people, particularly people in the south, the Pashtuns, came out and voted. Just days before the election, we had suicide attacks, we had threats, and yesterday there were 2 individuals whose fingers were cut. Directly from insurgents. So for us to assume that these elections, after many people put their lives on the line, are not credible, it's not really doing justice to the Afghan people. I think there was challenges, there are challenges, but like I said before, we are just developing, you know, this state. We're in the process of further building our institutions, so we should not have the same expectations as we have from various other Western countries. If we also take a look at various other turnouts on various Western countries, I mean, the turnouts are 40% to 45% at the highest level, but in Afghanistan it's roughly estimated that we have had about 7 million Afghans voted, which comes up to about 50% of the eligible voters.
If the international community or observers, election observers, see the results as being less than 30% turnout, and they say, actually, this election is not credible because the large majority of people did not vote and there should be a rerun, would you agree that that is what should happen next?
No, I would not. I would absolutely not agree to it. I mean, how is it that at one point that we have the Secretary General of NATO, Secretary General of the UN, the President of United States, all of them saying that these elections were a success, and all of a sudden you have individuals on the ground changing their tune. I don't think that's going to be acceptable to the Afghan people. Most importantly, we have to wait and see. I mean, we still don't have final numbers in terms of individuals coming out and voting, and particularly in the south and southeastern part of the country. So we have to vote until confirmed results come out, and then we will make these decisions. But we'll have to make sure that if this election goes based on the will of the people to the second round, then the Afghan people will agree with it.
Okay.
But if people meddle with it, if there are individuals that, you know, try to take this to the second round by any other means, it will absolutely not be acceptable to the Afghan people.
Well, just hold that thought, because as we said, the results are not out until Tuesday, but they're widely expected to announce a runoff between the 2 candidates with the most votes. Now, it's likely that these 2 will be the current President Hamid Karzai and his nearest opponent, Dr. Abdullah Abdullah. Now, if voters have to go back to the polls, they'll have to choose between these 2. These candidates may now be looking to make deals with others who've received fewer votes. By getting defeated candidates to publicly endorse them, they'll hope that their supporters will follow their lead in a second-round vote, but it may not be easy to gather this support, as some of the most popular candidates, including the man likely to come in third, have already suggested they will endorse neither. Well, it does talk, you know, it does raise the question, does it not, Ms. Gilani, about the credibility of candidates. You already mentioned there were many presidential candidates, very few women. What has this particular election done for the reputation of female politicians who want to enter public office?
For Afghanistan, Women Council is very important. The Afghanistan people. I'm very independent person. I'm not working with any groups and any party. In these elections, the president is invited again the warlord with us, and he has asking support from the warlord, and the people of Afghanistan is not want to this warlord coming again in the powers, and it's a very difficult situation for the Afghan women. The majority of the Afghan women, they are not very well educated, and they are not understand what is going on. But I want to say it is so difficult for the Afghan Women Council. It is very confusing situation for us to understand what we want really the great democracy for our country. This is not a part of democracy. 8 years is a very long time, and if the international community in the Western country, especially the United States, really want to to bring change in Afghanistan, to help the Afghan people, to understand the people's voice. But until this moment, nobody is listening to the people's voice. The international community is looking everything by our eyes in Afghanistan, in Kabul, in this election day. We have not clean elections, and we are worried a lot about our future. The international community now, they are in Afghanistan. For this is to help the peace process for the Afghan people, and especially for the Afghan women. We are not happy so much to the UN president say about this election, or some European Union or the international community said about this election. Is important to the Afghan people. So many women, they are not go to the stations, they are not give our vote, and so many men is not go there because they are worried from this kind of situation.
Okay.
Because,
okay. Let me bring in Mr. Cowan here. How concerned were you about the role of tribal warlords, as Ms. Golani calls them? And let's also talk about the Taliban, the influence of this group, desperate as they might be in their different groups, putting pressure on people not to go to the polling. I mean, any potential president of Afghanistan is going to have to deal with these problems. So how do you think they're going to do that?
Well, it is well beyond the remit of international election monitors to deal with issues of that magnitude. Our job as international election observers is to look at the processes as we see them and to report on them, and then to make recommendations to the relevant authorities. I agree with Mr. Karzai that it is up to the Afghan people to reach conclusions about whether or not this election was credible. Our only job is to report the facts as we see them, and we have been absolutely consistent in that regard, in that every statement Democracy International has made as international election observers is to say that there is a certain set of facts, and we need to wait on other information before we can even report the full comprehensive nature of this campaign. One, I think, is premature to judge a success prior to seeing a vote count and prior to determining whether or not the Complaints Commission has adjudicated all the complaints they've received. Even the Elections Commission has not yet received the votes from around the country, so to judge this a success at this point, I think is premature.
Okay, Mr. Karzai, let me bring you in here. One has to mention that you are a distant relative to the incumbent president, Hamid Karzai. But in terms of groups like the Taliban and tribal elders and groups in the south of the country as well as the north, they all have to be dealt with. And do you think the international community is listening now, as Ms. Golani said, or should listen to the very varied voices that there are within Afghanistan in terms of getting to a consensus? Even Hamid Karzai has talked about a loyal jirga being held to include the Taliban.
For the last 6 years, the Afghan people have been saying that it's time to listen to the Afghans. In this international engagement, please put the Afghans in the driver's seat. But unfortunately, that did not happen. When the international engagement, when Operation Enduring Freedom started in Afghanistan, we empowered or brought back people because of whom the Taliban had emerged, and now we're complaining about the same people. What has really not happened in Afghanistan is that we have not really empowered a lot of the tribal elders. We have two kinds of systems in Afghanistan. There's the official governance, where there's governor, chief of police, and individuals like that, which of course capacity is being developed in that. And then there's informal local governance, where there's the Khan, the Maliks, and various other tribal elders. Unfortunately, we have not worked with this mechanism, and that, I think, in my opinion, has been one of the most serious mistakes that we have undertaken thus far.
What's the solution then, in terms of being able to work with these people as and when a new president and the incumbent president is sworn in again?
There's a very serious challenge that we face because of various different reasons, including Iraq. We have a very serious insurgency on our hand. So now what is the solution? All Afghans are convinced that militarily we cannot win this conflict. By killing more Afghans, by killing particularly more Pashtuns, we're going to make this conflict more bloody and much more lethal. So what we need to do is have political solutions to this conflict. We need to start a dialogue with various levels of the Taliban. They are also the sons of this country, and they have the right to participate in this political process in Afghanistan. So after this election, hopefully President Karzai will win, and he has already said that he will call a Loy Jarga. And through this Loy Jarga and various other mechanisms, for example, the president has also said that he wants a greater role for Saudi Arabia, His Majesty King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia. He wants them to take a greater role. So there is possibility of starting a peace dialogue after the elections.
Ms. Gilani, would you also welcome a Loy Jarga that involved the Taliban?
The Afghanistan Women Council on the first Loy Jarga is request from the international community, from the U.S. Government, especially to the ambassador of U.S. Mr. Khalilzad, to invite the Islamic Hikmatiyar and also invite to the Taliban to the Loy Jarga. But they are not listening to the Afghanistan Women Council. Now is 8 years from these things. We are all the time is request from the international community, if you really come to Afghanistan for Afghan people to help them, to support, to peace come in this country, to go to make a dialogue with the Taliban, with the Islami. But unfortunately, they are not listening to the Afghan woman voice. This is the big problem from the international community, and especially to the U.S. government. Now with the President Obama, we have a lot of hope. Now I hope that President Obama is listening to the people of Afghanistan voice. We are not thinking about the Pashtun and about Tajik and Uzbek. We are thinking about all Afghanistan. All Afghans is our brothers and sisters. We are not thinking only about the Pashtun. We should to find the solution. These leaders now in President Karzai is a Pashtun. Why he is not find the solution for the Pashtun brothers? They have so many problems in 5-6 years. Near to the election, he is asking to come to the Taliban, to come to the dialogue. Taliban is not crazy to come with this kind of request to the Karzai government. But then I hope we are agreed by the help of, honestly, with the help of the international community to the U.S. government to go on the Loy Jarga side and to make a dialogue by the Taliban, by the another Islamic Hikmatiyar to stop this war, because the Afghanistan people, and especially the women in Afghanistan, we have become very, very suffering. We don't want to stay more with this kind of situation. We have not only problem with the election, we have a problem with the mafia of drugs, with the mafia of the NGOs, we have the mafia of the government. This government full of the corruptions, and we are not we not want to again for 5 years we stay with this kind of problem. We want to go on the good government and good people with the new faces, with the good new ideology. We don't want to find again and again and these people in these faces, because with this kind of government, people of Afghanistan become very tired. Now you understand, inside the country we see so much problems.
Sure, I think you've made your point very clear there, Ms. Gilani, and unfortunately there we have to leave it to Ms. Gilani there, Mr. Hikmat Karzai, also in Kabul, and to Glenn Cowan, our guest on this edition of Inside Story. Thank you for your time, and thank you so much for joining us here on this edition of the programme. We do welcome your comments and suggestions. Please do email them to us at insidestory@aljazeera.net. I'm Sahil Rahman. Thanks again. See you soon.